century. An incredibly important figure in the American Revolution and the founding of the United States. He was incredibly close friends, BFFs in fact, with Benjamin Franklin, and knew all of the founding fathers. And the things that he wrote and the things that he said and the discussions that he had with them informed their thinking at the founding of the United States. We know he was BFFs with Benjamin Franklin, by the way, because Benjamin Franklin wore one of those horrible Victorian rings with the ashes of your friends in it. And inside it was engraved with, best friends forever with Richard Price. I'm going to start and finish actually by reading some quotations from writings by Dr. Richard Price. And in between, I'm going to explain to you why I think liberty is so important. And he was writing these, you have to remember, in the wake of and in between the two revolutions at the end of the 18th century, before all the events of the 19th and 20th centuries with which we are more familiar now. So I'm going to start with this from the Discourse on the Love of Our Country by Dr. Richard Price. The chief blessings of human nature are the three following: truth, virtue, and liberty. These are, therefore, the blessings in the possession of which the interest of our country lies, and to the attainment of which our love of it ought to direct our endeavours. I have lived to see the rights of men better understood than ever, and nations panting for liberty, which seem to have lost the idea of it. And now, methinks, I see the ardour for liberty catching and spreading, a general amendment beginning in human affairs. Now remember, that was 250 years ago, and although the English is a little bit archaic, it's amazing how the world turns full circle and how relevant that is today to all of us. And I think this is the thing, isn't it? We've had in the interim, between the time of Dr. Richard Price and today, we've had the age of empire. It came, it rose, it failed. We've had the violence of the 20th century. We've had the often violent and toxic nationalism of the 20th century, a stick which is often used to beat those movements that are nationalist today, even though those movements have changed radically. And perhaps what we need to do is to recapture the idea of liberty as the foundation for our goals, as nations, as regions, whether those goals are greater autonomy, greater self-determination, or independence. That fundamental foundation, that idea of liberty that underlies everything, that is the key. And in a sense, it is the key to persuading our nations and our people of the need for the freedoms that we seek. Because we often have people with very different political views, very different views indeed. And occasionally we find that our movements are split. They are riven by those who have their own utopian view of the independent future of their nation or the autonomy of their nature, of their nation. I used to joke a year or two ago that there were potentially 3.14 million different views of a future Wales in Wales. There were only 3.14 million people living in Wales. And you have to have something to unite all of those people to achieve that dream. Here in Scotland, it's particularly pertinent. You've been stuck, I believe, on 45 to 55% for 10 years. And something needs to move that dial. Something has to push it across that barrier to 55 to 60. And perhaps the ideal and vision of liberty, well represented and well communicated, can help in that endeavor, because it does unite people from across the spectrum. I'm going to leave you with another quote from my friend, Richard Price. Again, apologies for the archaic language. You have to remember that poor Richard was a first language Welsh speaker, so he's writing in his second language. Civil liberty, in its most perfect degree, can be enjoyed only in small states, where every member is capable of giving his suffrage in person and of being chosen into public offices. When a state becomes so numerous, or when the different parts of it are removed to such distances from one another as to render this impracticable, a diminution of liberty necessarily arises. And this last bit is me. It is through liberty that we all achieve our freedom. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to stay seated for the second, because I'm not going to get in the way of our next speaker, Isabel Lindsay, who is, I think, a stander, aren't you, Isabel?
Yes, I'm.
She's a stander at the podium. I might change the height. I think most of you know Isabel. She's a veteran independence campaigner, veteran of the CND and the peace movement in Scotland, and has helped organise this conference. Isabel Lindsay.
There is one thing that unites all of us here today, all of the contributions we've had so far, and that is that there is a major democratic deficit. And we have got to get together to challenge our states and others who may not be here today with the question, what is the democratic route to self-government if that is the choice the people in any country, place, region, cultural group want to make? What is the route? And the answer to that, certainly from the British state currently, is there is no route. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what evidence you say is there. And from what I hear, that is also, in effect, the position in others, outstandingly so, of course, with the Spanish state and the Italian state. And therefore, this is what we have got to present, not just as a one-off in this bit of Europe or that bit of Europe, but something that unites across Europe, something that we all share, and that is the assertion that if there is evidence of a settled will of people to have self-government, there should be a democratic route forward. And that should not be denied to people, and it most certainly should not, as in the Spanish case, mean that democratic action ends up putting people in prison. Now, in the UK, they have not put us in prison. They're not proposing to do so. But of course, it has a very deadening effect on any campaign if you are told, well, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what evidence you produce. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to concede anything. And that is one thing that has been damaging since we had the High Court, the UK High Court, Supreme Court decision that the Scottish Government was not entitled to hold its own referendum. And that has made so many people in Scotland feel, oh, well, what can you do? Now, all I can say is that you then look at what are the other ways in which you can prove that the majority of people support that independence or whatever the option people want to choose. We've got to find a way of doing that. And we also, and this is our fault, we also have to ask ourselves why, after what was a transformative referendum that we had, why have we not increased that 45% to 55%? Now that's our fault, and that's something we've got to address. But one of the things which will enable us to address it is to say, if we can give you the answers, if we can educate people on all the opportunities, then if we have that confidence in the people in Scotland, we have the right to have a referendum which we can make our decisions on the future of our nation.
Righty. Our third speaker is from Northumbria. Richard Walker is the convener of the Hannah Mitchell Foundation. Should say that Hannah was who lived, well, she died in 1956. She had a long life. She was a northern working class feminist cooperator and socialist who believed in an inclusive, open approach to politics. So that's where the name comes from. It's aiming to promote that foundation, to promote progressive regionalism in the north of England, celebrating the radical traditions, culture and politics of the area. There's plenty that Richard's been involved with in all of that, but I know he is also the only speaker who has brought with him a PowerPoint full of pictures before everybody starts to wilt. So I will hand over to him and take it away, Richard.
Thank you. I can hear my mother saying there's always one. But anyway, usually it's death by PowerPoint. I can do this in 6 minutes, but I have to stick to the script, so I'm going to just read it out. So first, I'd like to introduce you to our idea of Northumbria. Where are we? Here, covering the whole of the north part of England. For a region we're big, 15 million people, almost as big as Greater Catalonia. Oh. Yeah. Fair question, does Northumbria exist? As Leslie will tell you, we're not a nation. What we want is recognition as a region of England and as a region of Europe. Here's the border stone at Carter Bar on the border of England and Scotland. For the past 10 years, the flag of England across the St. George has not flown here. What flies are the stripes of St. Oswald, the flag of Northumberland. So we have a regional identity, but what is it? The left-hand map shows the 7 historic counties of the north of England. The youngest of these was nearly 750 years old when it was abolished in 1974. But they were always just counties of England. There was no formal recognition of any province or region of the north. The right-hand map shows the 3 regions of northern England created in 1992. These regions were intended to have elected regional assemblies, just like anywhere else in Europe, France, Italy, Spain. However, in 2002, the Northeast England voted 78 to 22 to reject the plan. John Prescott, the British Deputy Prime Minister who had promoted the plan, said, "The door to English devolution is now closed for a generation." Well, my son, who wasn't born in 2002, is now old enough to vote. So time has passed and we now do have a new generation. The Hannah Mitchell Foundation was formed to keep the flame of democratic devolution alive. One of the questions we wanted Northerners to ask was, are these 3 regions the correct ones, or should we start thinking about the north of England as a single cultural and political region? In proposing this, we have strong historical precedents. The land between the rivers Mersey and Humber and Hadrian's Wall was a single Roman province. When the Romans departed and the English invaded, the kingdom created north of the River Humber was called Northumbria. We also had Edinburgh for a bit when we lost it. Ever since 625 AD, the north of England has had a single archbishop of the church and still is. So the province of York is the thing that's lasted for 1500 years, covers the whole of the north of England. The stripes of St. Oswald here predate the cross of St. George as a flag of our area by at least 600 years. So enough of our history. This is our region today, and we hope a place to pioneer new ways of living together sustainably and flourishing in the 21st century. But Leslie has herself made the point, where are the serious campaigns to unite the North and get the devolution of power from London? Despite the best efforts of the Hannah Mitchell Foundation, there's been limited success. The North of England has been our own worst enemy. In 2016, we voted for Brexit. We made the mistake of blaming Brussels, not Westminster, for our problems and our powerlessness. Then, in 2019, we trusted the obvious charlatan Boris Johnson to deliver levelling up. The man who persuaded the North to trust Boris Johnson was Dominic Cummings. Cummings, himself a Northumbrian from Durham, was the same guy who masterminded the campaign to reject the elected region assembly in 2002. We have seen the back of him for now. In 2020, a group of young Northumbrians set up a party calling for full independence for the north of England. It was a historic moment. Nobody had proposed an independent state for Northumbria since the Viking king Eric Bloodaxe in 954. Was it serious? It was serious in the sense of trying to make young Northumbrians think outside the box. Other campaigns exist in the north. The Yorkshire Party campaigns for a parliament for Yorkshire with similar powers to the existing Scottish Parliament. In elections in South Yorkshire in 2022, it came third with almost 35,000 votes. How did they get on in this year's general election? Sadly, crushed by Westminster's electoral system. Instead, the North once again decided to put its trust in the Labour Party. Look at those numbers. 87% of the seats on 43% of the vote. That's not democracy, it's a joke. But look again, only 6 points ahead of the Conservative plus Reform UK added together. It's not a red wall, it's a sandcastle. The risk is that if the North loses its trust in the Labour Party, it may instead look to right-wing populists like these two guys. So, the North, we've got a lot of problems. These are just the first three of our big problems, not to mention the warmongers who seem to want to get us all killed. What can we do about it? My thoughts are on this slide. I've had my 6 minutes, so I won't go through them now, but I'll put the slides, a few printouts out later, and you can come and talk to me about it. Thank you very much for listening.
I'm still sort of struggling to see where Hannibal Lecter fitted into all that, Richard. Is it just that he's so like Dominic Cummings? Is that it? Right, yeah, I thought that was it. Yeah, it is stunning and unnerving, and that's going to be in everyone's nightmares tonight, isn't it? Yeah, thanks for that. But fascinating, so thank you. Right, our final speaker is from Ireland, Kieran O'Luhan. He's an activist with the radical Irish language group Misnach and the Socialist Republican Party Airige. He's trained as a historian. He's shifted to looking at Irish language policy, and particularly the state's approach to Gaelic in the public sector in education and housing. And I mean, you'll be thinking, hang on a minute, you're home and dry. You know, you're independent, you got it made, knees in the breeze. What's not to like? But the point he will elaborate on is that although Ireland is often cited by independence movements as a kind of model of autonomy, its challenges mask deep inequalities, and that's partly what he wants to speak about today. So please welcome Kieran.
Morning, Tang. Thanks for the invitation to speak today. It's great to see this internationalisation of progressive forces. The far right was mentioned earlier, and you better believe that they're internationalising. They're sharing strategies, tactics, all manners of information that makes them more potent across the globe. There were riots in Dublin, for example, in November last year. And it was said that the far right internationally, through Twitter, had a huge impact in basically stirring up the riots. So the far right are a potent threat across the globe, and to push back against them, we need to internationalise and work in a mutual, cooperative way globally as well. So it's great to see that this does that. So I'll be brief because I know people are hungry and thirsty. I know I'm thirsty. Over the next few minutes, I'll provide just a sort of overview of the key issues shaping Ireland's trajectory. Ireland's history, as a lot of you will know, is deeply intertwined with colonisation, especially from the 16th century onwards, when it became a testing ground or a laboratory really for British imperialism. Those same sort of racist structures and ideologies were transplanted then to America and wiped out the native indigenous populations there. So they aimed to suppress the Irish language, culture and political autonomy. The plantation policies, for instance, displaced native Irish populations, and in schools Irish children were subjected to indoctrination such as reciting verses that celebrated being a happy English child. The goal was clear, to either assimilate or eradicate Irish identity. But the British were only partially successful in this. Various forms of resistance emerged over the centuries, some of them militant, some of them constitutional, others focused on cultural and linguistic preservation. That's where the organisation that I'm a member of, Mishnach, really comes in terms of cultural decolonisation. But I suppose, looking at the history of Ireland, the struggle for independence was only partially successful as well. The Irish Revolution of 1916 to 1923 ended with a partial autonomy for 26 of the 32 counties. But partition left the north under a supremacist Protestant government. Britain maintained influence in the south by supporting conservative forces during the 1922 to 23 Civil War. One of the key sort of architects of the conservative pushback during the Civil War was a man called Kevin O'Higgins. He was later assassinated by the IRA. But he said, "We were the most conservative-minded revolutionaries that ever put through a revolution." So that rift between left and right has really left its impact on Irish politics, and you might even say Irish society, for over a century. The legacy of colonialism and the failure to forge a truly radical path still haunts Ireland, really. The division of the island has stifled democracy, and it has exacerbated economic imbalances too. The West, where the Irish language remains strongest, has been hard hit by emigration due to a lack of economic opportunities. While a lot of the economic opportunity is focused around Dublin, there's a major imbalance between East and West. The Irish elite, who previously looked to Britain for their financial and economic interests, now look to multinationals, US multinationals, foreign direct investment and so forth. They're really what you might call a comprador class who manage wealth on behalf of global financial capital. This has led to an economy overly reliant on these aspects, and there's dire consequences then for ordinary people: housing, healthcare, education. There's a crisis in the cost of living. There's crisis in numerous sectors, deep social inequality. In the north, the intransigence and threats of unionist elements hold back self-determination, progressive change, and even a modicum of Irish language rights for Irish speakers. Only this week there were Irish language classes to be organised in a unionist-dominated area in County Antrim, and loyalist paramilitaries issued threats of violence to burn down the community centre in which they be held. In the south, the use of Shannon Airport for the transport of arms to the Israeli Zionist state, facilitating the slaughter of Palestinians, and the increasing military influence of NATO, the EU and the US threatens Ireland's long-standing policy of neutrality. This policy, rooted in an anti-colonial understanding and a rejection of empire, is at risk of being undermined. The Scottish Gaelic poet Sorley MacLean once referred to the bitter legacy of colonialism, noting how it endangered indigenous languages, drove emigration, and empowered what he called the porters of international big business. This same colonial legacy continues to shape Ireland's struggles today. That said, if autonomy had not been gained in 1922 for a part of the country, the challenges facing Ireland, particularly the social problems I alluded to, would without doubt be far greater, and neutrality wouldn't even be something to contest. We would be unwilling participants in empire. Looking to the future, there is reason for optimism. Demographic shifts in the north of Ireland have made the possibility of a united Ireland more realistic than ever before. Even right-wing and centrist parties in the south are now getting on board with the idea that there could be a united Ireland, though they underestimate the challenges ahead, I think. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 stipulates that a referendum on reunification can only take place if the British Secretary of State allows for it, or he believes a majority would vote in favour of it. That's a hurdle that will not be easily overcome. While Ireland has come a long way from its days under colonial rule, the country still grapples with the effects of that legacy. Nevertheless, with increasing momentum towards reunification and an increasingly left-leaning youth, and a youth not as shackled by post-colonial syndrome as previous generations, the country stands at a pivotal moment in its history. James Connolly, born only down the road in Scotland to Irish parents in Cowgate, spoke about a rejection of centralised and imperial states when he referred to, and it's been touched on by many of the panels, a free federation of free peoples. And I think that's what we're after. Ireland, like the other nations gathered here today, has an opportunity to forge such a free federation in the coming years. In fact, we must. The alternatives mentioned in the declaration earlier, either a completely anti-democratic centralised EU or essentially fascism, don't bear thinking about. So we must struggle for self-determination, for democracy, for the republic, for true decolonisation, free from external influence and empire. On Fubloch the Boo, Bear Bua, Goramina Maki, thanks.
Do have that pen. Well, great stuff there. So let's just go straight on to questions. I know there's a lot of people that have been saving themselves up for questions now. Where are we? And you can have this, I think. Yep, great. Right, we're still in business. Right, we're going to work from the back forwards. Right, so just go right to the back, if you would, Greg. And keep your hands up, because he's not psychic, and, you know, that's helpful. Right. Okay, so just take the three folk at the back.
There you go, Mary.
Oh, well, Tom has actually had his hand up all along.
Well, hi there. So I don't know if I'll be able to put this across the way I want to, but... Oh, you can't hear me? Is that better? Okay, so I don't know if you'll be able to hear me properly, or if I've written this, put it together properly. So here we are, we've got 15 nations, regions and movements brought together, representing their countries for democracy and independence. So when the UN Charter started in 1945, 51 countries signed up or ratified, which has now moved to 173 today. So I've got a couple of questions here, and the first one. All right. Well, it's all part of the same thing. Okay, so does the panel think that we have a problem with international law? That something is missed with respect to existing countries that are trapped and left out of the opportunity of self-determination, and that there should be a clause in the Vienna Convention Charter that includes countries that are not given that access or a voice to speak to the international courts. Examples.
I think that's the question asked, isn't it? Thank you. Okay.
Can I have my microphone? That's great.
Right.
Do you know the answer is going to be, problems with international law? Yes, actually, I'd imagine. But I'm sorry, because we're sort of, the trouble is at this time of night, sir, you've got to have a really sharp question. I'm going to give you a chance to think about it and just come up with a nubby question that isn't just going to get yes, right? So you've got 1 minute to think of it. Right, the lady beside you, and this is a warning to everyone, be sharp.
I was really cheered to hear so many of the speakers today speaking about identity, culture, language, national identity, constitutional identity, and also speaking about colonization. So my question to the panel is this, and particularly to Karen. What do you think the relationship is between a vibrant and energized movement for self-determination and a sense of national identity, by which I mean linguistic, cultural, and constitutional identity, and an awareness of what colonization actually means for a people who have had these systematically removed? Thank you.
Great. Right, and there's another lady in front of you.
My question is specifically, it's just a short question, a factual question. I don't know if it's about Wales. I don't know if Gwen could answer it or not. Recently, about a few years ago, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, said she was going to set up a nationalised oil company, or energy company, I should say, for all the renewable energy we've got in Scotland. And then shortly afterwards, she said they didn't have the power in the Scottish Government to do that. And then shortly after that, we heard that Wales was doing it and has, in fact, set up a nationalised, run by the Welsh Government, energy company. So I've asked a few senior Scottish politicians about this, and I've always had the same vague, kind of evasive answer. Energy is reserved, we know that, energy is reserved to Westminster. They don't really know what's happening in Wales, and which seems incredible to me. They should know what's happening in Wales. So I have heard that Wales actually does have the power to make it.
It's fine, thank you.
The question is, does Wales to do what it's just done, set up a nationalised energy company, which Scotland has specifically been told it can't? So are the two acts different, Scotland Act and the Welsh Act? Even though Wales is supposed to have a bit less devolution. I know this sounds divide and rule, but it's not meant to be.
Whoa, okay, peace.
Leslie, will I give this gentleman an opportunity for a 30-second question?
Here it comes.
Okay, it has to be a question.
And please keep my microphone open in case it isn't. On you go.
Okay, so Article 64 of the Vienna Convention, that includes existing treaties, sets out examples of how new international or convention laws and rules that would be or could be in conflict with respect to jus cogens or primity norm. The problem is that cannot happen unless a smaller dominated and colonised state will have recognition and will have a voice instead of the voice of the coloniser or the dominant state.
Right, sorry, stop.
So
okay.
how else would they or the world know what is going on? Do the panel think that this hot potato should be picked up by the UN and international courts?
Right, thank you. Fine. Can everyone just see, it's quite hard at this time of night to have long, complicated questions, so if you could really keep it short, that'll be fine. I'm making a short list here in case your sort of minds are blowing. Right, so let's just try and scoop everybody up here in this last session. So just, if you could go to the yes?
I'd like to ask the panel whether they really think that international law can bring about independence in a country. Is the answer not the political movement of the people within that country which forces change?
Okay, right, thank you. Right, over to Rob. Can you just see what other questions we have?
Hi, Rob.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. We were talking about the democratic route to find a solution. In the European Union at the moment, there's a lot of discussion about the expansion of the European Union. Is there any way in which we can, as a group, and with the help of independent Ireland, to get the voice of the stateless nations into that debate? Because in 2007, Professor Neil McCormick, SNP MEP, was trying to do that at that time. We have to know what progress has not been made and what progress can be made now. Right,
last question over here. Oh, suddenly there's two. Yep, fine.
Roland Chaplin, Royal Meteorological Society. The inevitable question for me, COP30, People's COP, being demanded by civic society in Brazil. How do we see ourselves, a civic movement or a political movement in the era when politics globally has been increasingly compromised by corrupting influences?
Right, and just behind you, just Greg, behind that. Yeah, it needs the old hand.
Thank you. I want to revert to the question of currency. Despite the fact that most of the speakers this afternoon didn't seem to raise the question of currency, my question is, can there be real independence without an independent currency?
Right. Okay, so there's... You don't feel you have to answer everything, folks, right? But so just working backwards, can there be independence without an independent currency? Should we be taking, those of us who ain't over the line yet, should we be taking advantage of the enlargement process that's happening in the EU at the moment? And would Big Brother Ireland help us? I don't know, Roland, were you talking about a people's COP? I kind of... Anyway, whatever Roland said, if you could hear him. Yeah, civic society being more... People are maybe going to... I'm trying to find ways to phrase this so that there isn't just agreement, but anyway, civic society being more important than politicians. The question from the back, which was, how did the Welsh do the National Energy Company, or did they not in the end? And we've also got the international law questions. Is it the salvation? Is there a route in there? Or is it a bit of a kind of, googly? And a question as well about whether the movement and national cultural identity needs to be aware of colonisation. So there's, easy stuff to finish the day with, right? So just pick a couple of those, because if you go on for all of them, we'd be here all night, right? So just take the ones that make you live.
So I'll quickly do the Welsh energy question. Broadly speaking, no, although there's a sort of pretend shadow of an energy company that's been sponsored by Welsh government. The truth is that Wales is constantly being shafted when it comes to energy policy and the exploitation and extraction of energy resources from Wales. I'm not going to go into the detail, but it's extensive and it's constant, and it will carry on until as much juice has been squeezed out of the Welsh orange as possible by the Treasury, and then they will probably throw some crumbs to the devolved government of Wales, because that's how they function and work, as we all know. Just a quick answer to the two legal questions. Look, government is by the will of the people. That is the way it works. If 60 or 65% of the people say, we do not want to be governed this way, the law will be changed to accommodate the will of the people. Because the only way you can prevent that is through violence, and I don't think that is acceptable anymore in the modern world in which we live. So if Scotland, or if Wales, have 60% of the population saying, look, we're done, we're leaving, then they have to find a way to let you leave. Because you cannot govern without the will of the people. We have to remember this. We can play around with international law as much as we want, but what you have to do is convince your nation that you want a different arrangement. There's a similar point to be made about a voice in Europe for stateless nations. It's not really in the European Union's interest to give a voice to stateless nations, which are constituent parts of the nations which make up the European Union or of Europe, because you're just going to create conflict within the institution of the European Union, which has plenty of stresses and strains inside it already. So first you have to win the argument within your state or region, And then once that is won, you can start to talk to Europe about joining Europe or not, or whatever relationship you want to have. It's a slightly different question about whether there are ways to persuade the European to be supportive of cultural movements within a broader European context, and that could possibly be a backdoor into influencing that European project and creating more influence and identity for states and regions. So there is a slightly nuanced approach to it, but if you go to the European Union and say, give us a voice, they're just going to say no. Because that's what I would do if I was the European Union. And I'm sure that's what all of you would do too. Currency. Actually, I don't want to do the currency one. I'll come back to the currency one. Civic nationalism. Someone talked about civic nationalism? Was that you who talked about civic nationalism? Yeah, okay, so I am a huge fan of civic nationalism, and I would like to see an awful lot more emphasis on it within what has become quite a sickened political institution. So if you just look at the UK and declining political participation, if you look at Wales, it's even worse. I think we had 44% for the last Senedd election. That's fewer than half of the population engaging. And you have to remember that hundreds of thousands aren't even registering, so it's even fewer. So yes, I think we should be doing more, and our politicians and leaders should be doing an awful lot more to engage with the public that they don't bother to engage with. So they only talk to existing voters because they think it's hard work to talk to those who aren't engaged. But that's very reductive, and if you keep making it reductive, eventually you open the door to protest groups like Reform in the UK, or other far-right groups and populists in other places. So if you should read Dr. Richard Price on civic nationalism. He wrote a couple of excellent essays. I'm banging on about Dr. Richard Price today, but he was very good. Currency.
Don't if you don't want.
I'm going to do it.
Right, quickly.
No nation that has become independent has had a problem settling on a currency eventually. Ever. Why would they? And why do you have to decide on a currency before you become independent? Honestly, you know, things will carry on. Day before independence, you're spending money in the shop. Day after independence, you're spending money in the same shop. And the same people are working in the same shop. As you go through the process, then you can develop different currencies, or you can choose a different currency to work with. But it's not a fundamental issue when it comes to the independence of your nation or the autonomy of a region. And it has been made an issue, particularly in Scotland, by the national press in the UK. And you know, there was quite a dramatic moment in 2014 that was all around currency. But it's a non-issue.
Sorry, Gwen, I'm sorry, we should have been out of here 5 minutes ago. That's really interesting, actually, but nonetheless. Isabel.
Just very quickly, yes, there could have been a Scottish energy company with some significant powers, not obviously not having the powers of full independence and full control, but a plan for this. If you go and look at the Commonweal material, they had a detailed plan for a Scottish energy company. And if you look at their How to Start a New Country book, or Sorted, or you just identify a particularly Scottish energy company, you'll see the details of how that could have been done. The question, why did the Scottish government at that time not do it? Despite the fact it was SNP policy, that puts a question mark over what advice they're getting, who makes the policy, who's got the nerve, how much lobbying being done by vested interests. So, but yes, there could have been a significant initiative there that was started. On the question of the civic campaigns and the political, the answer is you've got to do both. Ultimately, it is the political power structures which will fulfill the legislative requirements to transfer into an independent state. And you've got to recognise that. But it's the question of what makes the political power structures move. And one of the most important things is if there are all these public pressures and active and creative civic pressures moving them. Now that's what we did to produce the Scottish Parliament, because we not only had the normal kind of campaigns, but what we did in setting up the Constitutional Convention, but we could only do that when we had the support of major civic organisations. But when we had that support and were able to set up that, were able to show there was a genuine consensus to produce real plans and to get the damn MPs, I remember standing behind them in a signing ceremony, getting them to sign their support individually. As I said to some of them, we want your blood. And they had to sign up individually that they would support this. Now, that is no guarantee, as we know, with elected politicians. But that amount of pressure building up resulted in that legislation for the Scottish Parliament being produced within months of that new Labour government being elected in 97, God. And when we look at the present Labour government and the total absence of anything remotely ambitious, and that's to start with, that can always only get worse. Now, in terms of the question on currency, is Vital Scotland, I'm sorry, I disagree. Vital Scotland has its own currency. It is different with some of the other countries currently who are in the euro. That's a different situation, because you are already in a situation where there is a central bank on which you will be represented. And that was not the case with Scotland, and would not have been, because, of course, what immediately George Osborne said is, well, you're not getting represented in a central bank. You will be using sterlingization. You will not have access to the Bank of England, so you will have no central bank powers or functions. And that would have been, it just would not have worked for Scotland. And that's why it is so essential that we have, and we now have, really good plans with loads of work that's been put in on a Scottish currency.
I'll just say two very quick things. We're at first base, really, and we can't answer any of these questions in the north of it, from Northumbria. The point about international law, I would just say, appeals to international law needs to be an environment where the country that we're currently part of, UK, isn't actively trashing international law and destroying the whole basis of it. So that's a real problem we've got to address. I'm actually about the colonisation thing. I mean, England was the oppressor nation, was the coloniser. So there's a process to go through to come out of that and go into this millennium as something else. And we need to talk to people and places that are going through that process and share with them. And I think there's other European countries that are like that. And I'm going to answer a question in the last session about bigging up Scotland. This is the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to big up Scotland. I know you've taken... We really got going because 10 years ago, so many amazing things were happening in Scotland. So many people were talking. There was such civic activity. And the contrast with the north of England was depressing and disgusting, really. And we wanted a piece of that action. And although I know you feel that you've come back a bit in the last 10 years, you're still miles and miles ahead of us. And we're very envious of you.
I'll be brief because I could eat a horse, but I'll just answer the question about decolonisation as I understand it was put to me. And if I misinterpreted, we can talk later. I view decolonisation as one of sort of a tripod of struggle, decolonisation on culture, politics and class. And I think politics and class tend to ebb and flow. but culture and language, that's the glue that keeps people together. And if you can keep that going constantly with decolonial thought and action, then you're on to a winner. And yes, I echo what was said there about not being despondent, Scotland, because if you think about the sort of forces that were pitted against you, the most sophisticated propaganda machine in the world, nearly, the BBC, Murdoch's rags, the resources, the infinite resources of the British state, MI5, MI6, they were all at play, I think, and to come within a whisker of it nearly achieving independence, I think it can be done again. Just maybe getting the house in order in certain aspects, looking from the inside out, but I'm not an expert, so I'll defer to you.
That's interesting. What do we need to do? What do you mean by that?
Well, it just looks like things are disjointed at the moment, looking from the outside in terms of coherence and the sort of controversies within political parties and so forth, and rifts. I think unity and momentum is required again. But
well, thank you all for those fascinating insights, especially to Karen, who sort of suddenly thought, God, what did I say? It's fine, because we do know that obviously unity of purpose and kind of the dynamics that are created from all of us coming together are absolutely what we need to be able to keep going to find the next level. And it's been tremendous to hear these insights today. I mean, it does cause me to reflect that we are an independence movement that doesn't have the usual binding ingredients. We're not bound together by religion. We're not bound together by language. We're not bound together by anything except knowing that we are in a society, in a community, which could easily be a state as it was called Scotland. And I must say, when I was actually over speaking in a debate organised by BBC World before the Catalan debate, the independence declaration, and I was supporting the Catalan speaker, actually afterwards, one of the other side, the constitutional expert from Madrid, came up and said to us, he said, you guys are quite special, because to us you seriously are like civic nationalists. And I was waiting for a but, and it didn't come. Now, there's swings and roundabouts. If we were all bound together by a language, life would be a lot easier. It would be easier to denote, to distinguish who we are, as opposed to who we are not. But we don't have that. So what we do have, actually, Scots, is the most incredibly inclusive approach to being a citizen of this country, perhaps in the world. We're the people who decided that we would make anyone eligible to vote in the independence referendum who had lived here for 3 months. It meant Sean Connery didn't get the vote. If he didn't come back from Bahamas, nah. And it's very different. If you look at the Brexit referendum, it was ethnic. So there's something kind of strong about the way that we've created this, if you like, independence campaign, minus the usual things that help firm up an idea of identity. And yet perhaps we're paying too little attention, I think, to the cultural roots that we definitely have, because language really matters to us. It's just not a defined European language, but it's still your own. So there's plenty to think about from everything we've had today, not least the questions on currency that I know at least one person in the audience will be mulling over a lot. And I'd like to thank also the live streamers from Independence Live and yourselves here who've been streaming this entire debate. And that's a tremendous strength here. The self-startingness of this movement never fails to amaze me. So thanks to everybody here, particularly to Bjorst and Aka, who have come from essentially for us, far north, and are sitting here freezing. Apparently we have a different kind of cold here. It's damp, Was that ever true? So for everyone who's come from every part, really, across Europe, and indeed from our own British Isles, as you might feel we have to call them, but anyway, these islands that we inhabit, Thanks to everyone, and particularly that last session, which was Gwern, Isabel, Richard and Karen. Would you please give them a huge round of applause? And I'm just going to hand over to Robin McAlpine to just say a few words in closing. Thank you. Yeah, yes, absolutely. I'll remember that.
Right, listen, everybody, thank you so much for bearing with us today. I've got so many thanks because, first of all, I want to say this has been a pet project of mine. It has been, since about 2013, one of my great joys and my great lucks to have got to know an enormous number of the speakers who've been speaking today. I have spent time in their countries, they've invited me over, I have learned so much. My biggest sadness today is that you couldn't possibly have got anything like a proper sense of the breadth and depth of these nations from the ridiculous 6 minutes we had to give everybody. I was in Sardinia as a guest of Alessandro and others for 4 days earlier this year, and I learned so much. And I cannot tell you enough what a difference it makes to a movement, to a people, to know that you're not alone and to know that so many of the issues that you're discussing at home, other people are discussing in the same way. And the second reason this is a pet project is we need to internationalise more. We are too inward looking, we are not outward looking enough. It is, I think, it's hopeful that there's the chance that this might be replicated in Wales next year, and if so, I'll certainly be going. And I would love it if we could turn this into an annual event, where once a year we travel to one of the countries that are seeking greater autonomy or independence in Europe, and we get together and we progress. So, a couple of quick thank yous. First of all, a quick thank you to all of you for coming. It's been fascinating. Like I say, frustrating as well. There's so much more you could find out about these places, but you'll get a chance in a second if you want to stay on. Second of all, a couple of quick thanks to the various people who have helped out with this. So first of all, thank you very much to the Scottish Independence Foundation, who very generously supported us. When I'm taken over to other countries, they look after us very well, and I was damned if they were coming here and not getting looked after. So the Scottish Independence Foundation helped us to fly everybody over and support them with their accommodation. So thank you very much for that. I want to say a big thank you, and I say this every time, and anyone's been at these events with me before, I mean, kudos to Indie Live. You are an absolute boon to our movement. You have helped us always be seen and always be recorded, and without you we would be so much less. And also to Julia, who's helping to film as well. We are going to we're going to cut together a video of this. We will share it with everyone internationally and with any of you that you can share with other people afterwards. It's never done. It's always more to do when there's international collaborations. One of the things I want to say is not thank you for coming, but thank you for the patience to try and squeeze the history of your nations into 6 minutes. It is a ridiculous request, but there's no other way to do it. So thank you so much for what is no more than a taster to your nations and an awful lot more to learn from us. The other half of that is thank you, enormous thanks to Leslie Riddick, who took our incredibly cramped and chaotic agenda and made it look like it was intentional, and we meant it. So thank you so much, Leslie, for that, and thank you for getting us through a day. And finally, it isn't over if you would like to find out more, because I wasn't telling everybody, this was kept secret earlier on, but there's a free bar up the back for a couple of drinks, now that half of the folk have left, that's okay. So if you would like to stay for a drink, go and help yourself. There's drinks up the back. In about 20 minutes, certainly for all of our guests and for anyone who would like to stay, there's a couple of big pots of haggis coming through, and there's some cranachan as well. So stay, have a bite to eat and get a drink. Chat to our guests, chat to our visitors, and for the hardcore out there, they're getting taken out for a pub crawl straight afterwards, and that's when you'll find out what's really going on. So if you want to join for drinks and a pub crawl, do that afterwards. Everybody, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much to everybody for reminding us we are not alone. Thanks.